106.1 Next Radio. This is a big talk. My name is Canary Mugume. Tonight and today we shine a spotlight on the digital tax. Parliament has passed a 5% levy on the gross digital services income received by non-resident providers operating in the country. This means that if you are actually receiving a service from Netflix, Google, Amazon, Meta, or even Facebook, it means that most probably your subscription for all these services is most likely going to actually increase. However, the worry is that the effect is that this is going to be passed on to one of you who is actually subscribing to this service. What is the likely impact of this digital tax on every one of us? Today in the studios I have a terrific panel to discuss all this. Alysious Kittengo, who is a tax policy analyst from Siatini. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Good morning, listeners. I'm Alysious Kittengo. I work for Siatini Uganda.
Yeah. Jolly Mutesi, who is an officer for really in charge about international tax and transfer pricing at the Uganda Revenue Authority. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Canary, and good morning to all the listeners out there.
And Anthony Chibirige, who is a supervisor of international taxation at the Uganda Revenue Authority. Good to have you on the show.
Good morning, listeners. I'm happy to be with you on the show this morning.
Yeah. Jolly, let me begin with you. Let's just think through this taxation of the digital services, non-resident services. Do you think, or honestly, really look at the legislation and think this was really well thought out?
Well, Canary, I think that
you'd want to pull the microphone close to you. Yeah, okay.
When it comes to taxation of the digital economy, this is something that has been long overdue. So it's not something that started with Uganda. It's been around for quite some time with other countries, even within the East African region. Our neighbor Kenya has had it for a while now. Tanzania started it last year, so it's not something that has just come out of the blue. So has it been well thought out? I believe that it has been well thought out by the government, and the debate that has taken place in Parliament over the implementation of this DST has been wide-ranging, and all the different actors and all the different stakeholders have given their opinions and views. And I would think that it's about time that Uganda as a country starts to implement this tax, because there's a lot of value that these different multinationals are gaining from Uganda, and of course a lot of income that they're benefiting from the Ugandan population as well. So it's just about time that we start looking at how we can ensure that the multinationals that are operating in Uganda pay some fair share of tax to our economy.
As government, you're so quick. Let's just pay this tax and then get moving. But how is the implementation going to be done? So,
if you look at the bill that has been passed by Parliament, it is supposed to be a sort of a gross taxation. So what we are looking at is that the entities that are operating in Uganda, earning income from Uganda, that's the non-resident entities. So this is particularly focused on the entities that are not resident in Uganda. So yes, the ones you've mentioned before, that is Netflix, Meta, Amazon, but they're gaining some sort of value. They're gaining income from this country, are supposed to pay a 5% tax on their overall revenue that they earn from the country. So this is supposed to be implemented by the entities, paying 5% on the overall revenues that they earn. Now, do these entities know that they're supposed to pay this tax? We shall definitely engage them after the president has assented to this bill and it has become an act, or what we call law in Uganda. Do they already have obligations in Uganda? Yes, they do. If you're very aware that about last year, we started the implementation of VAT on these particular services. So these entities already are in Uganda and registered for tax purposes. Not all of them, but some of them are registered for tax purposes. But so far, they have been complying with the VAT component. So now it is a matter of engaging them and telling them, oh, we do have the DST and we require you to start implementing or paying your fair share of tax from the income tax on the revenues that you earn.
All right, Alysious, look, this is a tax that is going to really create competition around the local companies and also the foreign companies. For example, service providers who are in the same field as Facebook or Netflix, this would be an opportunity actually for local companies just to think of it. What do you think?
For us, we have been looking at, as my counterpart has tried to highlight, prior we have been advocating for ensuring that Uganda also tap into the taxation of the digital economy so that we can get at least something out of it. But also when you look at what you are trying to highlight of the competition between the local and multinational companies, having a digital service tax is good enough, because for Ugandans who have been paying corporate income tax, and the other ones who are just giving us services, but they're taking away all the money. And if the government comes to say that at least give us a 5%, it is good enough. But
why do you have a sense of feeling that they're taking away the money? Because we've seen in very many cases, especially in South Africa, in Kenya, this money is actually reinvested in the country, because we've had a lot of filmmakers and producers benefit from what the production looks like at the continent.
The aspect of reinvestment is good, and we are advocating for it. But when you look at how our investment regime is, we have what we call operating under the open account system, that when you have done everything and you have paid all your taxes, you are free to repatriate all the money. So the aspect of capital flight has been happening, and it is happening. It is only those ones who are willing to go ahead and reinvest the money who are doing it, because we don't have any cap on capital flights. So you find that everything that they have, every penny they are collecting from Uganda in terms of profits after sales, they are going to give us a 5%. So the other 95% is going to be taken. So there is no law in Uganda that requires someone to invest back into the economy. It is upon their will to go ahead and invest in the economy. But in terms of equalization or equity, in terms of issues of paying taxes as someone who is generating a revenue from Uganda, from the source country, it is good enough at least this time to see that we have put a tax on the income generated from Uganda. Because when you look at the other provision, like my colleague has tried to highlight, of the VAT, still it is going to be on us who are going to get paying the items we want to get from those people. So the company is going to factor in the VAT component in the prices of the commodities. And at the end, it is the person who is receiving that commodity, the person receiving the service, to pay, because it is the value added tax. But this one is going to at least to create a window whereby the multinational are paying at least something, and we know each country has its own corporate income tax. So if it is like Uganda, for us, they have a 30%. So if we are taking a 5% and they declare a 25% to where they are residing, that is good enough.
Okay, so subscription fees for all these services is likely going to increase.
In one way or the other, it will. And actually, when you look at, we shouldn't be looking at the digital service tax as one entity. We have to look at what enables digital service tax to happen. It is the internet. Because in addition for them to be able to get what they want in terms of profits, you have to factor in all the costs. The internet provides a platform for someone to do business. But for us in Uganda, the internet is charged at 12%. That means on the 12% which someone who is accessing that service, which the government is targeting, he has a 12% on that price. But also, because the other one is interested in paying a tax of 5%, is going also to increase the cost of that service is going to give you, or the cost of the goods.
Yes, absolutely.
So it means that you have a 12% here and the hidden 5% on the goods which you are consuming.
But people are already paying for VAT, which is 18% on these services. They're already paying for 12% on data that they used to subscribe on these services. This is just a case of overtaxation.
Actually, when you look at, because at the end of the day, we need the revenue as a country to be able to run the economy, and also to check on the problem of the debt we have now, and also not to leave the others to move as if they are free to move in the country, because they are providing a service to us. They are using the platforms we have. they are benefiting from the resources our people or the income our people have in accessing the services or the goods they are purchasing from them. So you find that in one way or the other, there is a cost. But
Absolutely.
now,
I think no
how
one
can
has
we-
denied that. What I'm saying is that you're already taxing too much from the same. You have 18% VAT for every service that we subscribe to. You have 12% for every data that we use to subscribe to that service. Now you're saying that 5%. It's just overtaxation.
When you look at what they call it the BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, what they had in proposal, the first proposal was to apply the VAT rule. But they found that it might be difficult. And for us, we are seeing it in the way that it is going to increase on the tax burden to the consumers. And we are saying that at least let us shift in one way or the other from the VAT to have a direct tax whereby multinationals are paying taxes. So as we started paying VAT in 2020, as per the URA, we think in one way or the other there will be a change or a reduction in how they are charging or levying the different taxes, because we know we have the VAT and now we have the digital service tax, which are increasing the cost for the person who is consuming this commodity. So it is a tax burden to the consumer. And that's where we are saying, for us as civil society, in the last proposal for taxation of the digital economy, we are saying that let us tax at least 1 to 3%. And the reasons we highlighted, one was that when you look at our neighboring countries, Kenya is taxing at 1.5%. Tanzania is taxing at 2%. Why are we scoring 5%? And yet at the end of the day, we are looking at digital growth or digital transformation. How can we ensure that we don't go beyond the range, but also be in line with other EAC member countries, so that even when it comes to the cost implication in terms of receiving a particular service, in addition to the VAT, in addition now to the digital service tax, because person who is looking at generating profits is going to factor in all the costs, and the prices of the goods are going to be expensive to the
Anthony,
consumer.
how is Uganda Revenue Authority actually prepared to collect this tax? What are they cooking? Because it looks to be a very extremely hideous tax to collect, because you have to have a conversation with the big tech.
Yeah, thanks, Canary, for raising that concern.
You want to speak to the microphone? Do you want to put it closer to you?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for raising the concern.
Yeah.
And I would want first to expound a bit on why any serious government needs to take, concern with the business of the tech companies. Canary, I don't know about the job you're doing today, but I'm quite sure that the job I do will not be around in 20 years' time, simply because it will be disrupted by,
technology
by the new business
and
models that these tech companies are coming up with. And for sure, what we have as our cash cows today, for example, the breweries, the telecoms, the banks, the taxpayers that are giving us the highest revenues, it's unlikely that they will be at the top in the next 20 years. We are likely to have these tech companies be our next big taxpayers. So any government needs to take interest in what is happening in that space and begin engaging with these players. And so far, most of these entities are quite receptive. They are concerned about their reputation.
Yeah.
And they've been forthcoming, especially the very big entities. We've already successfully implemented the VAT regime. And, it's moving on seamlessly. There are some nitty-gritty details that need to be ironed out with the new legislation on digital service tax. But we're going to engage these entities as well. and let them know that, okay, now we have this as this new tax, and we hope that they will be able to embrace the new tax as and when we begin the implementation.
Yeah, there's just a question around how much involvement did you actually put them in? Because the stakeholders need to have had a say, especially the ones that are affected directly by this tax. As Uganda Revenue Authority, or even the discussion around Parliament, how much involvement was actually there? Just to make sure that this tax was passed by Parliament with at least involvement from all the stakeholders.
Yeah, so for sure, one thing is that part of it is, as a country, we're trying to catch up with what the rest of the countries are doing. Worldwide, where all these entities are, the countries there have already started taxing them, either as part of the bigger group of countries, what we call the inclusive framework, and their proposals on how that is going to happen. And a country like ours, which is out of that framework, have resorted to unilateral measures. This is a unilateral measure.
Yeah.
You know, but the whole underlying thinking around this is that while, for example, Next Media here pays taxes on its income from advertising that goes on, Google, Facebook or Meta, which are now doing the similar business and are probably disrupted your clients. They are taken on the clients that you usually used to have, are not paying the type of income taxes that you're bearing. So even without having a lot of engagement, which engagement has taken place, especially through the civil societies, there is definitely a concern that any country has to move fast enough and ensure that you have something to create equity in the economy and ensure that the small businesses which are not using the tech platforms, as they pay their income taxes, then also the big players who are actually coming in a big way and interacting directly with the final consumers are able to pay a fair share of tax as well.
Okay, Jolly, I want to come to you. Do you feel like the stakeholder engagement was sufficient?
Canary, I don't know how you would measure sufficiency.
Yeah, because, for example, do you, as Siatini, submitting what you thinking about this digital tax, the impact of it to the Committee of Parliament, and whether this was considered or not?
Yes, but Canary, before any bill is passed in Parliament to tax any particular sector of the economy, there are discussions that are held with the various stakeholders. URA was consulted. The civil society represented by Siatini was consulted. The taxpayers themselves know that this is an ongoing discussion that is happening in Uganda, and they know that they will be obligated to pay this tax in this next financial year. So there was a discussion that took place, especially within the country, much as the targeted group of companies is outside the country. But I'm sure they were following up with the discussions going on. During some of our engagements, some of them would actually raise this and say, we are hearing that Uganda is planning to impose a DST. And of course, we were giving them details and telling them, yes, there is a plan in the works and the Parliament is debating this. So they were following up with the engagements that were happening in Uganda.
Look, Jolly, I subscribe to iTunes, iCloud.
Apple, yes.
I think Apple Plus, something like that. Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all these other services. My fear is that if I've been subscribing to Netflix for about $11, my fear is that in the coming month it will be increased to $13, particularly for Uganda. Why? Because all the tax that Netflix has to pay is going to be passed on to me.
I don't know why everyone is raising that as a very big concern.
Why shouldn't it be a concern?
There's been publications and there's been research that has been done, and some entities such as LinkedIn are known to actually pass on their tax obligations to their clients. So we do not even know if that is actually going to happen. You might find that these companies may not actually pass on this tax to you. They may actually decide to absorb this tax within their business, because as a business person, you're going to pay tax. Plus Canary, if we're looking at it from that perspective, then are we going to say that any trader in Uganda should not pay income tax because we are worried that they may pass on that tax to the consumers?
No. What I'm saying is that if Parliament increases a tax, for example, on sugar, if I've been buying it at 4,500, I'm going to buy it at 5,000. It's just simple as that.
Yes, but are we not going to tax because we are worried that any increase in tax then is going to be passed on to the consumer ultimately? Because that would mean that we would never be able to tax anything.
Jolly, I think the worry is around the fact that, look, we are going to have more people who are being limited to access and use these digital services. The big take.
I don't think that people will be limited in using these services, because let's look at this. Like my colleague Anthony has mentioned, you are providing an advertising service as Next Media Services. Yeah. You are paying income tax. Yeah. Are you passing on that to your consumers or your clients who are paying for the advertising services?
Increase the rate card.
It depends, okay? So are we going to say that, oh no, Next Media should stop paying because they're going to pass on this income tax to their clients? So tax is something that is embedded in the economy, okay? So for as long as you're
what I'm saying is that as NBS, I'll increase the rate card depending on how you are taxing me.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Tax is part of the economy. So we cannot say that we cannot tax, or people should not pay tax, because it will ultimately increase the cost to the consumers. Because for us to say that, then it would mean that the potential positivities that are coming from that particular sector outweigh the benefit of having income tax. For example, if you've been following the discussions that have been happening.
Jolly, I thought that you would argue on behalf of the people.
Canary.
As a civil society organization.
No, I'm from URA, Canary. So
yeah. But what I'm saying is that I thought you'd argue on that, because you see, as Uganda Revenue Authority, as much as you want to collect, taxes, as a civil society organization, like Alysious belongs to,
Siatini.
I would want to think you just don't want to just pick money from people and just move away. We'll discuss whether this actually meets the taxation policies. But for now, honestly, this is just overtaxation.
It's not overtaxation, because the entities that are operating within Uganda providing similar services are paying income tax. So then why should we say that those that are operating outside Uganda should not pay income tax because we are worried that they'll pass on this same cost to the consumers? So are we also saying the same about the entities that are operating in Uganda that are providing similar services and are already paying income tax? Because like we've said, Jumia is paying income tax. Jumia provides similar services like Amazon, okay? Meta provides similar services, advertising services like Next Media and all the other media companies out there in Uganda that are already paying income tax. So should we say that we shouldn't tax the non-residents because we are worried about them passing on the tax to Ugandans, yet we are taxing our own companies, our own indigenous companies, and we're not bringing that up when we are taxing our indigenous companies? Because anyone that has to bear the burden of tax might pass it on to the next person.
Jolie, let me ask you, how many services do you subscribe to? Non-resident?
Non-resident services, Netflix, the one that are, because remember this is targeting people that are paying for these services. So the ones that I'm paying for, Netflix, yes.
Netflix?
Yes, Netflix.
Okay, look, I pay for Netflix, Apple, Amazon Prime, obviously Apple TV, and a couple of few others, because sometimes that within my family, not really home, but family, the people who are doing gaming, so I have to pay for that too.
Which is a luxury, and Canary, it's something that you're enjoying. It's a luxury that the people in your family are enjoying, the convenience of being able to watch everything that they want to watch, with the convenience of listening to Apple Music, the convenience and efficiency that you have, be able to access all these entertainment platforms. It's just fair that these companies that are giving you this convenience that you're benefiting from and willingly paying for also pay some bit of income tax.
But do you realize the impact of actually taxing these? I'm not saying that they shouldn't be taxed. I'm saying, do you realize the impact? of taxing these services?
It's the same impact of taxing any service. Okay, so the impact of Canary's little baby not being able to watch cartoons on Netflix, it's a small price that we can contribute to our economy
Come
to
to
see
think
that
of it
Uganda
now.
actually grows and our economy grows and infrastructure grows and we're able to provide public services and able to pay off some of this public debt.
Come to think of it now, I have to subscribe to Disney Plus. Aloysius, how much stakeholder engagement was actually involved in this entire process? As Siatini, how do you look at things?
I cannot give you the number of the stakeholder engagement because let me first say that even when you look at the topic as it is, some people don't want to consider tax as something which they can discuss. But also even others look at as tax as a technical thing, which is not given an opportunity to by many to start to digest and provide their perspective. But Siatini, under the Tax Justice Alliance in Uganda, we engage different organizations from the different backgrounds that bring their perspective from their different backgrounds on a given topic. So you find that we have a platform where we engage the Minister of Finance, the Tax Policy Department, and then we were given even the opportunity to participate in the parliamentary hearing to present our proposals. But this one based on the perspective of what are you taking, what are you putting on the table? Because it is good to give you the perspectives on a particular thing, but what do you want to see? That's the question I can say. Because when you look at, when we're engaging the Minister of Finance, we proposed our issues that we need actually to tax the digital economy. Because it is not Uganda alone. It is a big global thing, which is looking at, as my colleague was trying to highlight, things are changing. We are changing away from the brick and mortar, traditional of doing business, to the internet-related support, which is giving everything to you even at your door place. Yeah. Even in your house without opening your door. You can get what you want. You can buy a book, which is just automatic, and you pay using the Visa cards and others. So you find that, how can we tap into that? The challenge is, how are they, apart from those ones that are willing to pay, how are we making these people pay?
So that you're starting to sound like URA.
No.
I'm afraid.
I'm just explaining to you.
I'm just afraid that
how do we make this?
Look, Aloysius, they're already paying 18% VAT. They're already paying. We are already paying 12% of every data that we use to subscribe to them.
Let me start from the 18%, yes. Then I go to...
18% is being paid by Ugandan consumers, not the...
Let me start from the 12%.
Yeah.
Actually, as civil society, we were against the internet data. But the government said, let us change from OTT, and then we call it what? Internet data of 12%, which is too higher than you can expect. And as I told you earlier, that even though we are looking at digital transformation, the enabler of digital transformation is internet. And for everyone to subscribe, for everyone to access, you're supposed to have internet. You cannot order anything without internet. So when you look at the National Development Plan is looking at issues of ICT penetration. But for you to be able to penetrate effectively and transform, you need internet. But when you look at our internet cost, is a bit higher. And yet you need
that's the thing,
to support digital transformation.
Okay,
so in one way or the
5%.
other, you find that from the internet point of view, it is too high. And we need government to revisit that in one way or the other. Let the government reduce or even remove it, because we are looking at how can we see digital transformation in Uganda beyond even taxing the multinational, but we need also to do, because we're even seeing some companies growing within Africa and Uganda in particular.
Yeah.
So how can we ensure that the aspect of internet is addressed? I'm going to give you an example. In the US, they have what they call a moratorium. It is like a ring fencing on internet. But in Uganda, we have a 12%. And yet we are looking at digital transformation. The question is, are we supporting digital transformation? Beyond even looking at the other ones, because anyone can move out. We saw what happened with the Facebook aspect. Anyone can move out, anyone can come in. But how can we ensure that as we are looking at digital transformation, we are supporting digital transformation from the grassroots, that is Ugandans, to other levels where they can penetrate. So to me, the aspect of internet, we need to address it. Uganda needs to look into it. The aspect of VAT, as you know, it is a consumer tax in one way or the other. And the multinationals they're supposed to register within Uganda and then file returns on the VAT. But as I told you, for me, if I'm selling my commodity and I have to factor in a VAT, because now it is not the Alysious to pay VAT in particular, but I'm supposed to pay VAT indirectly on the service I'm receiving from the company. So the company can declare VAT to Uganda Revenue Authority. It is a cost. But remember, as I told you, when at the initial stage, this aspect of taxing digital economy started earlier. But when you look at the aspect of checking on we have the problem of illicit financial flows. And companies were not paying taxes within Uganda because we are taking the money outside Uganda, taking it to tax havens or where there are low tax levels. But they said, can we tax using the VAT? That one has been actually, when you look at the list of countries that are trying to put VAT on the digital service and others, there are many. But they said maybe this VAT is higher and it is paid by the final consumer, even though it is declared by the company. Let us put a tax which is targeting a company itself. So then let us put digital service tax, because that one is supposed to be paid on the turnover of the company, which is okay. And now the question is, apart from joining the big bandwagon of how to tax digital services, can we look at the implication of the VAT, the implication of the digital service tax, the implication of the digital internet, the 12% on internet, so that we can see, are we benefiting, or we should fix our tax on our focus on the digital services where the multinationals are paying. Okay. So in one way or the other, we have to meet the services that are supposed to be provided by the country. But the question is, are the tax commensurate to the services we want?
Yeah, that's a bigger discussion that I think we're going to have in I think our last segment. But quickly to Anthony. Anthony, just heard from Alysious. I just want to understand, as you're just looking for the next opportunity to tax, you have completely failed on expanding the tax base. You're just looking for this one particular Canary Mugume. What other corner haven't we taxed? And then you just tax that. I mean, many people out there are not paying tax, and I would believe you would, I think, benefit more from taxing these other particulars. But the same taxpayer, you tax them left, right, and center.
Well, that is interesting, but of course, all as stakeholders in this country should be concerned that the government needs to raise revenue to run the country. Yeah, and because of the structure of our economy, probably the instance of taxation is falling more on some players than on others.
Yeah.
Because we have a huge informal sector. I mean, you look at the guys who are riding borders, for example. In other countries, they wouldn't go away without paying some form of taxation because they are involved in some economic activity. And by someone riding on the border, then that means the guy who is having a taxi, or who was operating a taxi, will not have that client. So this guy is taking away part of the income that more or less a more formalized business would be earning. So as government, there is a need that businesses are formalized so that it is easier to tax those businesses. The issue of overtaxation of the digital economy, I think we've not got to that extent yet. Yes, there is an excise duty tax of 12%.
As in, from URA's perspective, this is you don't see it that you're overtaxing the same person.
Okay,
and,
really,
and with the digital tax, is just limiting people from accessing these services.
no, I mean, of course, there are interventions that government came up with. Initially, the excise duty on the internet, and I think usage of the internet, and I think that as we get more capability in taxing these tech companies, it's something that may be reviewed, because what we would want is actually to have usage of internet popularized more and more, and that enables startups to be able to do the things they can, and eventually creates employment. So the taxation of usage of internet data as such is probably something that needs to be reviewed. And good enough as we are making inroads in identifying which services are actually being provided, who's providing those services, and those people paying taxes, then that gives government another avenue of taxing activities that are specifically targeting the income that is earned from these activities, as opposed to the inputs into those activities. So, for example, the internet, the excise duty on usage of internet is a tax on the input. And in that case, probably that wouldn't be the right way to go about it. But now that we have engaged with the tech companies, and we can identify the services that they are providing, then this is an avenue for government to get more scope to tax these activities.
Okay.
And for now, I think this is what every other country is doing.
Okay.
We are not doing something out of the ordinary.
Yeah, we'll look into it if you're actually not doing anything out of the ordinary, because health and education services are still being taxed as long as they are non-residential.
Sure.
We'll speak into that after this break. Let's take a break. When we return, this digital tax, is it pulling the big techs closer, or they are being pushed away? That's a discussion that is very important and needs to be heard. This is the Big Talk. Good morning.
106.1 Next Radio.
Today morning, we are discussing and shining spotlight on the digital tax. In the studios today, I have Alysious Kittengo, who is a tax policy analyst with Siatini Uganda, Jolly Mutes Uhiriwe, who is an officer in charge of international tax and transfer pricing at the Uganda Revenue Authority, and Anthony Chibidige, who is a supervisor international taxation at the Uganda Revenue Authority. Jolly, I want to bring this to you. Do you think, in your own opinion, and you speak as someone who actually subscribes to some of these services, not not as URA, yeah, do you think that this is actually going to pull the big tech closer to us or push them away? There's an opportunity, but there's also a scare.
Well, if you look at it from the tax perspective, Canary,
You
I
want to
would
come
think
close to the
that
microphone?
this is going to actually bring the big tech closer to us, because they want to understand their obligations. They want to understand what they are meant to do in this particular regime.
Yeah.
If you look at the experience that we've had from implementing the VAT regime, we didn't even know these multinationals. We didn't have their contacts. We didn't know which countries they operate from. We had no idea. We just knew that there is an Uber operating in Uganda, there is a Meta operating in Uganda, there is Netflix, but we had no idea where these companies were located. But as we started the implementation of VAT last year, like I informed you earlier, we were able to get these guys to come on board. We were able to contact them, engage them, have meetings with them. We had so many meetings over the course of the 12 months period, online meetings.
With all these... With these
Yes, with the representatives. Of course, we're looking at the tax representatives of these entities.
Yeah.
So we're able to tell them more about the taxation regime in Uganda. They're able to understand where we're coming from, and we're able to bring them closer. So I think from that perspective, we're bringing them closer. We're not pushing them away, because like I said, these entities want to actually comply. They're not trying to run away from their obligations. They know that paying tax is a responsibility that any member of society is supposed to abide by. So they do not want to run away from their obligations.
Jolly, look at
they
it this
want
way.
to comply.
Look
Yes.
at this way. So I'm operating in a continent that is, more than just 1 billion people. A few people from a certain country called Uganda, with very small internet penetration, want to put a burden on me by paying tax, which is going to be a couple of billions every month. As a big tech, I'm looking at this and saying, you know what? I think it's about that time we wrap up. I mean, Facebook has been banned in Uganda. I do not see any efforts at all to have it unbanned. And, a couple of people have lost money, including the local business people who, used to use Facebook to market clothes and other small businesses there. But as a big tech, when I think through things, I'm saying, you know what, it's about time we wrap up. We just leave this small country.
To surprise you, Canary, Meta, Facebook, is one of our biggest taxpayers right now under the VAT regime.
Really?
Yes. Okay, because much as Facebook has been banned, first of all, Meta doesn't only operate Facebook. Okay, they have so many other platforms, and some are income generating, some are just communication platforms. But of course, the biggest being advertising space.
I know Threads will eventually become.
Well, we shall get there as well. So Meta has not actually wrapped up. You see, they would have been annoyed and said, first of all, you banned us in your country, and you limited our penetration or the number of people that are able now to access our services, because if you're providing an advertising platform, as many people that can access the platform, the more revenue that you're generating. But now you've banned Facebook, so there's a big percentage of Ugandans that are not accessing it unless they have VPN or unless they're using Wi-Fi that doesn't have that limitation. But Meta is one of the entities that actually came on board, and they are paying and collecting the VAT on the amount of revenue that they're still generating from Uganda. So as you can see, they didn't wrap up. They didn't say, let's get out of this small, tiny little country in Uganda where we are earning about how much per month. No, they did not. And of course, from their perspective, the revenues from Uganda may not be that big, but from our perspective, it's a big chunk of revenue. And we definitely want to get some tax from that particular revenue that they're earning. Like I said, they are not entities that are trying to run away from their obligations. They're entities that actually know the value of paying taxes and understand the fact that they're operating in a small economy that needs this income, and they're willing to actually comply. So it's not going to make them, wrap up and run away. If the one that is banned is still around and has not wrapped up, you could actually say that probably government needs to rethink the ban and see how they can support Meta, because Meta has stayed and actually is continuing to comply with their tax obligations even if they're banned. So I don't think they're going to wrap up. It may be a small economy, but it's revenue. Yeah. Okay.
Anthony, do you think, in your own opinion, that this will pull the big tech companies, closer to Uganda? There's an opportunity that now they'll have to say, we are not resident, we are non-resident service providers, and now it's about that time maybe we invest in this country called Uganda, we come closer to the people. Or are they going to say, you know what, this is enough, you're already taxing 18%, we should wrap up and maybe provide services to other countries like Kenya and Rwanda?
Yeah, so, Canary, I think one thing you need to understand here is that these entities are businesses. And the biggest threat for a business probably may not be the tax it has to pay, but the competitors. So if they move out of a given jurisdiction or territory like Uganda, then that space is going to be occupied by another player. And to them, that is a bigger threat. But also, they are looking at the long game. As I've told you, today Meta is doing advertising. But probably tomorrow, it will come up with an algorithm that can compute, taxes for the government. And collects taxes for the government. So they are looking at that kind of thing. Because, as I said earlier on, these entities have the capability to disrupt almost every business. And in years to go by, they will be involved in many different sectors of the economy than the ones that they are currently involved in. And so that is one big incentive for them to remain. And as happens, elsewhere that they operate, there is an obligation to pay tax. So it's not a new thing in Uganda. The rate may be a little higher than what it is elsewhere in the world. And that is something that probably also can be looked at as we go on this journey. But they are probably, they stand to benefit more than lose because of a new tax that has come on.
How are they benefiting? Probably the demand for this service is going to go down.
The demand won't go down.
I'm not saying that it's a proven statistic, but I'm just saying that, if I'm going to pay extra dollars, I would rather, if I was subscribing to, let's say, a family package, I'm going to subscribe to an individual package for a service like Netflix or Apple,
Yeah, and I think it was mentioned by Jolie earlier on. Really, the DST, the tax that has been proposed by government, is a tax on income. It's not a tax on consumption. The VAT was on consumption, and that should be borne by myself, Canary Mugume, and whoever is using the service. But honestly, the tax on income should be borne on the profits that that entity is reaping from the jurisdiction. So I wouldn't expect in the short run for these entities to increase the prices on the services that they're offering just because Uganda has come up with a DST.
Yeah.
That is not right, because this DST is being imposed on the profits that they have earned from the provision of these services in Uganda. So, and probably that's something also that the civil society can look at as and when it happens. For the VAT, yes, it was justified because that was a tax on consumption. And when the DST, for the VAT, when the VAT was imposed, then automatically the prices at which these services were being consumed had to go high.
Yeah.
We do not expect these prices to go high just because we've imposed a tax on the profits of these entities.
Okay, Alysious, you realize that some of these non-resident service providers are actually investing a lot of money in content creation and other services. For example, we know how much money goes into a lot of content creation around Netflix in South Africa, in Nigeria, and even Uganda, actually. They've got to a point to say, you know what, I think that there's a burden that has come through. So do you think, in your own opinion, that this will actually pull them closer to say we're going to be residential, or push them away? In this case, this service is not available in your country.
Just to add on what my colleagues were trying to explain, the VAT is clear. For them, they don't even have to suffer. It is just to be included on the item. Now, the 5%, the digital service tax on the turnover, is not a big thing, because it is for someone who is doing business to pay a tax, because tax is something which we have to bear with in anything when you are doing any business. Yeah. But remember, they have an opportunity to take the 95% back home. And you find that even sometimes when they go back home, that 5% is considered as an expense. So they have to pay whatever amount of tax, corporate income tax, they're supposed to pay. If it is, as I told you, if it is 30%, they will say you paid a 5% in Uganda, so you can pay a 25%. So depending on the threshold they have as a percentage of corporate income tax. To me, in terms of coming into Uganda, it is now a debate which we have to look into from the National Development, National Planning Authority, the UR, and the Minister of Finance. How can we create incentives? Because Uganda is a developing country, we are still behind in terms of technological development, technological transfer, and skills. How can we ensure that we can become a hub of technology development or technology in all aspects where we can? Can we create incentives directed to that? Because there is a proposal within the National Development Plan of bringing, they call them bringing the diaspora professionals and attracting professionals from there to come into Uganda. Have we created an incentive known by anyone that in Uganda, if you're going to do technology development, technology improvement, there is an incentive of this kind, so that people who are in diaspora, who have experience, who have done something, who would love to invest in Uganda, so that we can do greater development in terms of internet, in terms of ICT.
Yeah,
they can come into Uganda.
Do you think that there's will for that? I would imagine, of course, the leader on that front would be, of course, the two ministers in charge of that docket. Actually, 3 ministers in charge of that docket. But there's just there's a feeling out there that there's just no goodwill for such things to thrive, but also that the people who are in such dockets do not understand the dynamics, for example, of technology, its impact, and the opportunities that do exist.
I can say that that's why civil society, or maybe in one way or the other, as other advocates should look into, because this National Development Plan is our development plan, and we propose to achieve those ones. And the results which we have to look at, have we increased internet penetration? Are we developing access to ICT-related activities? Who is responsible? How can we do it? So that we can see Uganda's accelerating in terms of development of infrastructures that can enable internet penetration, digital transformation within the country. Because in one way or the other, it is a global thing. How can we benefit from it? How can we create an enabling environment, infrastructures that can support digital transformation as you're looking at taxing them? Because we have to get the money from them on the penny they are generating from our people within Uganda. Because we cannot leave them go without being taxed in one way or the other. Because our local, like, small and medium enterprises and those ones that are infant are paying taxes.
Yeah.
How can we ensure that they also pay a tax? But also having that innovation behind us to ensure that there is more effort put in research and development and innovation by Uganda to ensure that we don't look at taxing them only, but also attracting them into Uganda.
You bring in a very interesting point, which really rotates around innovation. Jolly, I want to bring this to you because this tax will also affect web hosting software companies and those supplying image, text to information, self-education packages, which government has not exempted, music, films, including gambling, and other broadcasts and events, as well as those on remote maintenance of programs and equipment. This means that if I am running a local company, but it is cloud-based, it means that I'm going to pay a little more than what was being paid. This is, in one way or another, telling the local innovators that, look, you can now move with your work on physical hard drives because you cannot put it on the cloud because we'll tax the cloud. Isn't this, in one way or another, pushing the local innovators into a really, really tight corner? Over to you, Jolly.
Canary saying that would be a misconception of the DST, because the DST is not in any way targeting local entities. And one of the...
But I just read to you.
Yes.
I just read to you that it will be affecting web hosting software companies.
Non-residents that provide web hosting.
Exactly.
Non-residents that provide cloud services. So the first thing to look at is who is providing. For as long as the person providing is resident in Uganda, that's a local company incorporated here, or a local content generator that is in Uganda, that person is not paying the DST.
But guess what? They are within their business incorporating in cloud-based services, and the cloud is not based here. It means they have to pay for that. So whatever service they provide and they try to make business out of it, it means that they have to in one way or another incorporate this tax and say, after all, there's 5%, so services will actually be a little more pricey than ever.
Canary, it's not about where the cloud is best. It's about where the company is best. Because that is why we're telling you from the beginning that this tax is strictly targeting non-resident companies. Now, we may go into the gymnastics of defining residents for tax purposes and who qualifies to be a resident, who qualifies to be a non-resident. But for a company that is registered in Uganda, automatically they are not going to be part of this segment of people that we're looking at for purposes of a DST. Because for you to qualify to pay the DST, you have to be a non-resident. So it's not looking at where this cloud is being hosted, but where the entity that is paying the tax is registered. And most of these entities that we're targeting are entities providing those particular services that you're reading, but providing them by being provided by a company that is not resident in Uganda.
Yeah, I hear you, but what I'm saying is that the company might not necessarily pay tax because it's a resident.
It will pay tax. It's not that it will not pay tax. It just won't be a DST.
Self-border, you know. But what I'm saying is that a lot of these people's work is actually cloud-based. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It's cloud-based. A lot of their backup is cloud-based. This also implies that they have to pay service for that a little more pricey than ever before.
So if they are getting the cloud-based services from the non-resident entity, I'm getting that that's a question you're trying to pose, that this is a Ugandan entity, okay? They need to get a service from a non-resident entity because they're not able to get that service within the country, so they will have to pay for it. Canary, they've been paying for it either way. The only difference is that right now, the person who's providing them this service is obligated to pay a particular amount of tax to Uganda. So I think you're stifling the growth of these small entities that are depending on the large multinationals for these particular services. And I would think we're not stifling the growth of these entities because 5% being paid by a non-resident entity is not going to ultimately convert into 5% being paid by the person who's obtaining this service in Uganda. And besides, even if they were to get it from, let's imagine that there was a company in Uganda that was able to provide it. Of course, now there is none. But even if they were getting it from a company that was resident in Uganda, that company would still have to pay tax. So it's not that we're stifling the growth, we're just creating a fair competition across, so that whether you're in Uganda or out of Uganda, for as long as you're providing something and you're generating income from Uganda, you're able to contribute a fair share. So I don't think that we are going to stop these innovators from coming up with their different innovations, of course, based on the services that they get from the non-residents. We're simply creating a fair advantage across so that everyone who is benefiting in one or another from this economy is able to pay some fair share of tax. Will the cost increase? That, of course, is something we're waiting to see. Will the entities then pass on that cost to Ugandans? No, it's not obvious. It's not obvious. Because like obvious. I said, some entities actually absorb the tax themselves and do not pass it on. Because again, how much more can they pass on? If one entity is providing this at, let's say, $1, okay? If they increase it to 1.2 or 3 or 4 or 5, is there another entity that is going to continue providing it at $1? Yeah. Everyone will shift to the one that is providing it at $1. So before entities even think about increasing the cost of their services because of a tax that has been passed by a parliament in a particular country, they have to look at their competitiveness. If they cannot remain competitive in that market, they will not increase the cost. So there's so many dynamics to this than just saying that a tax is going to increase the cost.
Jolly, what I want to bring to your attention is whether this is because you see, as Ugandans, we're trying to, break through into the use of the big tech. And at the same time, you're putting so many barriers as Uganda Revenue Authority. We're saying that you should be creating more incentives, and then in the future you can think about how you can tax, because you have created incentives on how to increase on the penetration of Ugandans into this digital space. But you think about taxing it later. It's just so many barriers. There's tax before you access a service, after you've bought data. There's a tax on the mobile phone. There's a tax on, of course, the importation of the mobile phone. There's a tax on just joining this space, and now there's 5%. I mean, there's just so many barriers before you access. Aren't you seeing opportunities that other countries are seeing in joining the digital space, and why you need to lift more barriers as opposed to imposing more?
the question that you pose is a balancing act, okay? So at what point then would it be sufficient or good enough for Uganda to impose this particular tax? Right now, our internet penetration is estimated to be about 50%. That if you look at the data from UCC, there's been a lot of growth in terms of the digital space. Of course, envisaged in more people buying internet-enabled phones. Affordable internet-enabled phones are all over the market space in Uganda. So this shows us that there's a growing need for people, and there's a growing usage of internet for different parts of our economy.
Yeah.
There are many people that are accessing different sectors in the economy using internet as an enabler. So at what point then does government then tap into this growing economic sector? Like I said, before you start thinking that it's too early to tax a particular sector, you must look at the benefits. Do they outweigh, or do the advantages of leaving this sector untaxed outweigh the benefits that this particular sector brings to this economy? I was trying to give you an example earlier. When you see the debate around taxing Bujagali, if you were following the parliament discussions, one of the overarching things that everyone kept talking about was the fact that the cost of electricity will go up if we impose tax on this company. And of course, do we need electricity so bad that we can actually exempt this company from tax for this particular period of time until Ugandans can actually afford electricity? And yes, the answer to that is yes. Now, can you put digital economy into that particular space and say we cannot tax because we need this space to grow? Hasn't it reached a point where we can say that now it has grown and it's time for government to start reaping something from this growth? I would think it's the latter. It has grown to some particular extent and it will continue to grow. So it's time for government to starting to reap something from this particular growth.
Of course, if I was working for Uganda Revenue Authority, I would argue the same. That's the benefits outweigh the rest of the impact. I want to come to you, Anthony. Are there opportunities in this space? And opportunities for whom?
Yeah, for sure. And government is very alive to the fact that the digital space is a big driver of innovation. And ultimately, if you have a lot of innovative companies coming up with various products, various services, that will create employment, which has other advantages. For sure, for example, if we have more people come into the employed group, then government can also collect additional taxes in terms of pay as you earn. And for that reason, government is keen to ensure that whatever steps are being taken, they do not slow down innovation, because there are many, ripple effects as a result of that innovation. So this is an opportunity that is there for government. And then probably also everyone should also now keenly look at where the world is going. If you have schoolgoers, they need right now to get involved, in some kind of studies that directly link them with, digitalization and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I would imagine that government should have at least excluded education and health services.
For now, at least as far as I know, among the big techs that we're taxing, none is directly involved in providing educational services or even health-related services. Okay, this law has just been passed by Parliament. It's yet to be signed off by the president.
But I think he has an option, or Parliament has an option, because this is the second time I think they are passing this.
Okay, and let's imagine that eventually now it's going to be passed.
Yeah, whether it goes to the president, it's a certain two, or it's not eventually to become in.
Yeah. So one of the things that will come out eventually, there will be subsidiary regulations.
Yeah.
Regulations more or less to clarify how the authorization of this law will be undertaken. And we expect that with those regulations coming out, there may be clarity in some of these fields in terms of the services or activity that government intends to tax. And as and when that comes out, then we will know the entities that are directly affected. But for now, education and health-related entities, we have not yet taxed any of those.
Yeah. As a civil society organization, you know, that Alysious belongs to, I would argue that, look, it is important that you study the impact of this particular tax before you implement it. As government, I would imagine that this has gone through a well thought through process, and before you arrive at the final decision, which is legislation, that it is already well thought through, and it's being taken, the effects are being taken care of. But the sense and feeling it gives me, what happens in Parliament, it just looks like how OTT was passed. There's just too much lugambo on these social media platforms, and therefore we should limit it by putting a tax. It never achieved anything anyway, apart from collecting money.
No, back at URA, we have a research department, and for sure it collects a lot of this data to inform tax policy. I know also within the Ministry of Finance there is such a unit, but largely what we're seeing with this data is that the sectors that are affected by digitalization, we have shrinkage in the traditional businesses.
Yeah.
Especially, for example, like media. You guys who are into advertising and the like, there is shrinkage of revenue and that can be got from those sectors, and this revenue is being now earned by the big techs. So and I'm sure these kind of statistics are influencing the policy that we are ultimately having in this space. So there is some, there is data that government is relying on to come up with the policy.
Okay, let's take a break. But when we return, how will this digital taxation be affected by the double taxation agreements, commonly known as the DTAs? It's a very important concern that we should look into. Big Talk returns shortly. Good morning.
106.1 Next Radio.
On NBS television and streaming live on the Afro mobile application. If you're on the go, be sure to download it and catch the conversation in the studios today. As we go to our last segment is Jolie Mutesi, who is an officer in charge of international tax and transfer pricing at the Uganda Revenue Authority, Alysious Kittengo, who is a tax policy analyst at Siatini, Uganda, and Anthony Chibirige, supervisor international taxation at the Uganda Revenue Authority. Gentlemen and lady, I want to bring this to your attention. Can we factor in DTAs, double taxation arguments, and how this will actually affect the digital tax? I'll begin with you, Alysious.
When you look at Uganda as a country, as I think 9 double taxation treaties and agreements that are effective, and when you look at the multinational companies or the big tech, They are more within the jurisdictions that Uganda have a double taxation treaty with. And when you look at some of the countries that have been trying to look at from the VAT to the digital service tax, they are saying that you are going to pay the digital service tax if you don't have a permanent establishment within that jurisdictions. So you find that in cases where you have a DTA, I don't know how the government is going to look at it, because the DTA gives you, it is a trade-off, or it is a revenue sharing, tax sharing agreement, where you say that if you have a DTA with us, you will be in position to pay at this percentage, and then for us we are taking this percentage with that country. But we find that some of the DTA jurisdiction, the DTA the countries that we have signed with the double taxation agreements are more of in tax havens, like Mauritius and the Netherlands. So you find that if you have a multinational company providing a service in Uganda, situated in Mauritius, situated in Netherlands, which is a tax haven, and it doesn't even have, some tax haven don't even tax, but some have a threshold in terms of a tax rate which you are going to pay. So if you take the 5%, you might find that some of the tax havens where these companies are residing, they call them the area of residence than a source country. Source country is like now Uganda, and then they are residing in Netherlands or UK. They will say that we are going to give you a tax credit. So you find that the perspective, the intent for taxing digital economy, apart from generating revenue, was to check on the aspect of illicit financial flows. So if you have a tax credit within your area of residence, it doesn't make sense. And yet, you are benefiting and you don't pay even the tax where you are supposed to pay. So actually, more is needed, even the regulations, when it comes to the management of the digital service tax. How are we applying? As I told you, that there are some countries that have come clear and say if you have a permanent establishment within Uganda, then you are not treated as a what? An overseas multinational company. So you are treated as a national company because you have a permanent establishment, or you have a branch. Some countries have tried to look into that. So
or a franchise
within Uganda.
Yes.
So you find that you are not paying a 5%, you are going to pay as a local entity. So those are some of the clarifications that are needed. And even the regulation, I think it will be in position to give us a clear guideline how this is going to be applied when it comes to the issues of having a double taxation agreement within a double taxation agreement between Uganda and the country, and that country is hosting a multinational company which is providing a service in Uganda.
Quickly, Anthony, the onus is really entirely up to you as the Uganda Revenue Authority and how you're going to implement and collect this tax. I know that within the law, there was, of course, the minister given powers for creating statutory instruments, to provide for certain guidelines. But how are you going to maneuver the DTAs?
Yeah, so that certainly is likely to be a challenge because, and Alysious has mentioned some of these aspects. Traditionally, businesses are taxed from countries where they have physical presence. Now, in the case of the big tech, they are transacting with our jurisdiction, but without having physical presence within the jurisdiction. And the taxation rules, as they have always existed, did not envisage this kind of situation. That's why countries had to come together under the umbrella of the inclusive framework and debate how best can we tax these entities. That discussion is still ongoing. It's not been concluded, but eventually they are going to come up with some kind of mechanism that will look at what they call residual profits and be able to tax them in each of the countries within which this multinational operates. Now, and the importance of that discussion was to avoid countries coming up with unilateral measures. Now, if you look at the situation we are in as a country and the fact that we have come up with this DST, it's a unilateral measure. It's not part of what the wider world community is discussing in regard to the imposition of this tax on the big tech.
Yeah.
And where we have existing commitments in terms of double taxation agreements, we're definitely going to have challenges on how we will be implementing our DST with those existing DTAs. So we are also keen to see what the regulations that will come from the ministry will advise on, because ultimately, as we go on with the implementation, it has to be guided by those regulations, taking into account that we have existing commitments in terms of our double taxation treaty network.
Or what if maybe, forget the existing ones, what if maybe you've signed the double taxation agreement with, let's say, Netherlands, which you already have a treaty with,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden Meta, that carries Instagram, Facebook, and now recently Threads, just goes and gets a franchise in Netherlands. That means that for all the 5% you've been collecting before it registered, you'll not be collecting it. The reality of it.
Yeah, so there's going to be challenge, with and also for entities probably to avoid getting into, having this tax implemented. They would probably go into what we call treaty shopping.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say government really did not think this through quite well, and there was not just enough stakeholder engagement? They just faced the reality of it.
I wouldn't say government did not think through it, and I'm quite optimistic that there is some solid policy underlying this direction. And we need to wait from what we have in the regulations to really know how to go about it. I'm sure somehow we find a way of implementing the DST, but let's get to that point once the regulations have been tabled by the minister. Okay,
Jolie, quickly on the DTAs, but also have a burning question on Facebook. But first, the DTAs.
Well,
or maybe let's just explain to our viewers and listeners, what are we talking about when we talk about DTAs?
When we are talking about DTAs, probably for those who may not be able to understand that conversation, we're looking at double tax agreements that Uganda has signed with other countries. So what happens with double tax agreements is they allocate taxing rights. So first of all, you must have that particular tax provided for in your own taxation laws, and then after determining that this tax is applicable, then you determine, according to the DTA, if there's a DTA between the country that you, the entity that you're trying to tax, the country where it's resident, and Uganda, then you look at who has the taxing rights for this particular tax that I'm trying to impose. And of course, DTAs only apply to income taxes. That's why the DST comes in at this particular point. Now, currently, Uganda has 9 DTAs that are signed and effective.
Yeah.
Of course, the popular ones being Netherlands, Mauritius, Italy, UK, South Africa, India, okay, to mention a few. The rest are known as popular. So what happens then is that for as long as we have an entity that is resident in any of these countries, in Netherlands or in the UK, and they're providing digital services in Uganda, then the question becomes, who has the taxing rights? What does the DTA say? Does Uganda have the right to tax this particular income, or does the UK have the right to tax this particular income? if the UK has, does then Uganda, being the source country or the country from which this revenue arises,
benefit at all?
Have the right to tax at a lower percentage, or there is a higher percentage of tax? So all those come into play. But will the DST then be affected by the DTAs? I would think no. Okay, first of all, when you look at the companies that we have so far, most of them are not resident in countries where we have DTAs. We have a few, like Netflix is, I know most of you think Netflix is an American company, which it should be, but the Netflix that we have in Uganda is a Netherlands entity. So,
really?
Oh yes, so it's a Netherlands entity, the one that provides services to
most
Uganda.
probably will not be affected.
So, so yes, that conversation has to happen. So now that we have a DTA with Netherlands, then who has the taxing rights?
Yeah.
Now, when you look at most of these DTAs that we sign,
if you find that Netherlands has the taxing rights, so then how does Uganda benefit?
of course, if Netherlands has the taxing rights, then Netherlands has the right to tax, and Uganda doesn't have the right to tax. But then again, what is the income? If you look at most of these DTAs, we signed them before DSTs came into place, before the digital economy was a big thing. So most of these DTAs do not have a specific article that looks at this particular income. So in situations where you find that there is no specific article that provides for that income, then you go to the articles that cover any other income. And most of the time you'll find that it is the other state, being the Netherlands, that has the right to tax. So yes, the conversation should be there because the DTAs will affect how much we're able to collect. But again, that's just one company. Then there's the Microsoft, which is not registered. There's Google, which is not registered in
Amazon.
Yes, who are not registered in
Uber.
those entities.
There are many.
Uber is actually in Netherlands too.
Jesus
So
Christ.
there are other entities that are not in countries that we have DTAs with, and those will still be affected by the DST.
All right, quickly on Facebook. There's a ban on Facebook, but also government hopes to collect some revenue from Facebook. Is collecting?
Okay. Facebook is actually complying with the VAT. Of course, it's the Ugandan consumer that is paying, but Facebook is, or Meta, because for us we know it as Meta, is helping Uganda to collect VAT at the moment.
Yeah. So how is this going to work out, especially now with this new DST? Because, I mean, from when, like, it's been, 3 years? Yeah. This ban on Facebook at the same time. Since elections. This ban on Facebook. At the same time, you guys from Uganda Revenue Authority still want to collect money from it. It's already complying. But also, maybe if government is actually targeting like real good revenue, do you think that it's about that time maybe the ban is lifted? The whole conundrum. How
Canary,
do you view it
as a revenue body, of course, we are not privy to whatever situations led to Facebook being banned in Uganda. But for now, what we know is that Facebook or Meta, like I've said, is complying with the first obligation to collect VAT on behalf of Uganda Revenue Authority and remit it to us at the end of the month. And they're one of our top collectors right now. So that only implies that Facebook is still earning, or Meta is still earning revenue from Uganda, even with the ban. And they recognize the fact that they're still earning. What the challenge is then they'll tell you, when someone uses a VPN, we're not able to identify that that person is from Uganda. So at that point, we are losing out on that revenue. Where someone is accessing any of the platforms without using a direct connection or without making a direct payment that comes from Uganda, we are losing out on that revenue. So we are actually the ones that are losing out from this ban, because people are still accessing these platforms. Even with the ban, they're finding a way to access them. And for as long as a Ugandan accesses and pays using a VPN, then you may not be able to locate that income directly to Uganda. So Uganda then loses out. But for now, they're still earning income, at least by the fact that they're declaring VAT. They are recognizing the fact that they're earning income from Uganda. And I do not see them refusing to pay the DST, because you've already recognized that you're earning revenue from a country, and the DST is going to be based on how much revenue you're earning. So it then becomes seamless that they will know that we're earning, we're collecting VAT on what we are earning, and we're remitting it to URA. Then it also suffices to say that at the point when the DST comes into place, they'll simply apply it to the revenue that they're earning from Uganda. So I don't see them refusing to comply, but yes, the discussion needs to be had on how to balance this ban but then collect. The discussion needs to be had.
And you know, just come to think of it, that if I want to access Facebook, one, I have to pay, just in case I'm trying to market using Facebook, and this tax as by Meta is imposed on me. I have to factor in, one, the 12% of data, and then 2, the 5%, then VAT. I know it's still collected, from the taxpayer. But then you realize that actually even VPNs will be non-residential services in this case. If there's a company that actually pays for services for VPNs, there will be non-residential services.
Yes.
You're just paying a whole bunch of taxes to social media. Anyway,
The tax is going to be paid by the multinational, not by the Ugandan. The DST specifically is targeting the multinational, not the Ugandan Canary. Let's make that clear to the listeners out there. The question of whether they will transfer it to Uganda, like I've said, that we wait to see whether that will happen. But at least let it be clear right now that the tax is aimed at the multinational that is earning revenue from Uganda, not aimed at Ugandans.
Aloysius, quickly on the Facebook ban.
As my colleague has tried to explain, actually, I think the government needs to go back to the drawing board and see what do we lose. Because at the end of the day, when you look at, I was writing somewhere here, we have the Excise Duty Act, which is supposed to be acting as a deterrent on unnecessary behaviors or something which is not needed in society or doing harm. And when you put a tax on the, if you ban, we are losing revenue, as she has explained. But if you put a tax in terms of excise duty to check or to name it as a sin product, it loses meaning. And I remember when we were trying to discuss with some of our colleagues from URA, I said, maybe now we are moving away from the sin tax or excise duty to the using excise measure as a means of collecting revenue. So to me, I think it is now, if we are to look at Facebook as a problem to the community in terms of a social problem, what impact does it have on Ugandans and what impact does it have on the revenue we want? Because if you say we are not going to use it, there are other measures which people are using to distribute information across. So we need to go back and say, what is the problem? How can we address this one from the Facebook perspective? And ensure that the aspect of considering some issues as a sin commodity is checked also. We need to revise our excise duty. Is it for the deterrence or we are using as a measure to collect revenue? So in one way or the other, there are some items which we need to look at, not as a sin product, but also as a commodity which we can get money from.
But
so
why,
to me,
why is the ban existing anyway?
That one I don't have any perspective, but I can say we need to have debate. Where is the problem? So that we can generate revenue, but also facilitate development of the small and medium enterprise, because they have been able to use those platforms as it is now with YouTube to market their products so that they can get money. And I remember when you were trying to ask my colleague about there was a question which was relating to the value chain. There is that value chain which is created between the multinational and the infant industries here. So if we make sure that that value chain is respected and supported, because we need to develop our internal infant industries that are benefiting from that platform, so we need to revise. Are we losing? Are we enabling? Or we need just to kill the infant industry opportunity to grow and generate revenue? Because for us, Uganda as a country, we need revenue to provide services, but also in the way of providing revenue, we need to look at the aspect of income generation. The small and medium enterprises which were using platforms like Facebook are no longer using it, because I can tell you there are some areas where you can access Facebook, but some areas you cannot. And you might find that those small and medium enterprises, they cannot access those areas to access and market their commodities. So that makes it difficult for them to market their commodities competitively, which we are looking at now. Okay, if you have the competitive advantage, how are you using the platforms being provided to generate revenue? Revenue in terms of money, but also revenue in terms of the taxes that are going to be taxed from you. So the aspect of Facebook, we need to have a cost-benefit analysis. Now, since when it happened and now, can we have at least an informed research that can give us a cost-benefit analysis on the revenue we are losing, on the development of infant industries like SMEs and its impact, so that we can have an argument which can give us a go-ahead of saying no to Facebook or bringing back the Facebook onto the platforms that are used by Ugandans.
Okay. Anthony, quickly on Facebook before we go to the way forward.
Okay. My view on that is that there is need for engagement, and we can only solve our problems as humans through engagement. So I guess when the ban took effect, there were regulatory concerns that government had, but also on the other hand, the revenues that government is collecting right now.
Anthony, you're such a diplomat. Eh? It's just the government was not really impressed by what people were saying on social media about the politics, and they decided, you know what, this is something, this is a platform we can go with.
It's a regulatory issue.
Jolly's disagreeing.
That's what I think. It's something regulatory, and we need to find ways of coming, to a middle ground. So what I'm saying here is we need Facebook to run, because it's a source of revenue for government now.
Yeah. What do statistics say in terms of before the ban and after the ban? Has revenue gone down in terms of the declaration for VAT?
No, of course, the ban was 3 years ago. The implementation of the VAT regime is just about a year old now. So we do not know what happened prior to that, because this is a recent thing, the revenues. Yeah. But I also think it's a good sign from Facebook that despite this ban, they have come and honored their tax obligations, which, as Julia has explained, is we think that if we did not have the ban, probably we would even have more revenues than what is currently being paid. So there is need for engagement, and ultimately to have all sides, honored to certain obligations, and then we have a seamless flow of the VAT regime and the DST that has now been imposed.
Yeah. And your way forward, because from your docket and how you supervise international taxation, it's going to be quite one of those taxes that you have to sit and think through implementation and put in place measures where government can actually benefit, but at the same time, draw a line between implementation and scaring away the big tech, at the same time, inclusion and usage of the big tech for the local consumer. So in your own perspective, what should be the way forward?
Yeah, at least the way we did it with the VAT regime, and how we intend to do it with this DST regime is we're going to get into engagement. The non-residents are already been notified, and they're willing to have that engagement. What is not very clear for now is what the regulations will hold. But once we have clarity on all that, we're going to have engagement. I know that we have some concerns, and probably, as also happened with the VAT regime, we might look at aspects of giving some lead time for them to comply with certain aspects. But we have that discussion.
Okay. Jolie, your way forward. But also you could maybe speak to maybe exemptions. Should there be exemptions? Especially for, I'm really specific on this.
So you want to pay
education and health.
You don't want multinationals to pay. You want them to be exempt.
No, what I'm saying, especially for look, if my son is actually accessing these platforms, for health services or education services, they should be exempted. Why not?
Okay, so thank you, Canary. Now, on the way forward, if I can speak to the exemption first, unlike VAT, income tax has specific exemptions under the law. Because when you look at VAT, there are specific services that are excluded from the VAT charge. And we have a whole schedule in the VAT Act that provides for these services. And that's where education falls, health would, or some health-related services would fall in that particular docket. But when it comes to income tax, the law is different. Okay, income tax has to specifically apply to a particular entity, either because of the type of income that it's generating or because the law specifically exempts that particular entity. So whether they will be exempted or whether particular services will be exempted now goes back to Parliament. It's not for URA to decide, because if the law does not exempt you, URA cannot start exempting you.
You as a stakeholder, what would you recommend?
The recommendations will come in, like Anthony mentioned earlier, we do not have those types of companies right now. We do not have companies providing health services on our register right now. There are not so many multinationals that provide health services on the digital space, so we don't have a lot of that, and it's not something that we look at as a worry right now. But at the point when it becomes significant, I'm sure government will look into it and provide for a particular exemption if need be for those specific services. But as you are going forward, we are ready to implement the DST as and when the president assents to the
for
bill.
you that
You're
ready.
We're ready.
You'll
we
collect the
have
money.
had engagements with
Yeah.
the taxpayers, as mentioned earlier. We've been discussing with them for the period of over 1 year, because we've been implementing the VAT right before this. So we've had client engagements. We're looking at stakeholder engagements, because we have various stakeholders in Uganda that we rely on to help us to implement these laws, like the banks, because ultimately all the payments for these particular services have to go through the banking sector. So we shall continue with those particular engagements. We have a robust IT infrastructure in place, because multinationals love simplification. If you're able to simplify your procedures and processes, then it makes it easier for them to comply, and they're more willing to comply when you have simplified processes. As URA, we have a robust IT department. We have a lot of expertise that is able to develop infrastructure and procedures and processes online that will enable these entities to comply seamlessly. So we are ready to start implementing for as long as the government wants us to implement this TST.
Okay, Siatini, I'm looking forward to your policy report on the digital tax. What is your way forward in a perspective of a civil society organization?
It is not even the perspective of civil society. In one of our observation and some of the recommendation which we made during the tax bills, we had an observation that even we have what they call the withholding tax, which is 15%. And now the government is advocating for the 5%. That makes the effective tax rate of 20%. So clarity is also needed there, and I think government should also look into it to see, are they going to be managed concurrently, or we are going to take one. So that was one of our observation. Two, some of the recommendations which I have is that when it comes to the double taxation treaties or double taxation agreements, Uganda, I know they are doing it, but we need to review and renegotiate our double taxation treaties and agreements to ensure that there are no loopholes. I know lawyers are saying that the higher you go to review the laws, you are creating more loopholes. But now we need to go ahead to review some of our double taxation treaties and agreements. The other one is that in terms of supporting digital inclusion and digital penetration, as per our National Development Plan 3, we have to revisit the aspect of the 12% on the internet data under the excise duty. Do we need to implement that? Do we need to remove it, repeal it, or we need to check on the percentage? Because this is actually the engine of digital transformation. So to me, I think we need to revisit that measure of the internet data.
I thought that maybe as civil society would also make a case for the removal of the taxation or even reduction on the levy on the importation of mobile phones, because we want to encourage as more people out there as possible for them to be able to use smartphones and join the internet.
It was our proposal, even in some of the proposal, that we can remove some taxes. And we had a proposal that the government was saying that we are going to have companies that are going to do assembling of the smartphones in Uganda. I don't know how far it has gone. Because that one checks on the issues of the customs, and then we can say, okay, we are going to give you an incentives for producing these commodities within Uganda. So that makes the final price for the items or the device relatively cheaper compared to those items that are imported into the country. So that one goes to, have we, as Uganda as a country, revisited our proposal of assembling those, of inviting companies that can assemble machines like smartphones. Because when you say people have on internet and people are on smartphones and people are having phones, which phones are you talking about? Can people afford internet access? Or it is among these ones who are able to access, have money to put that indirect tax when it comes to paying for internet data. And that takes me to the aspect of innovation. It was also highlighted as a result in the National Development Plan. How can we ensure that that goes even to what you are saying of inviting companies that can assemble funds within Uganda? How can we ensure that we support innovation and development, research, innovation and development in Uganda, that can check on the problem we have of high taxes on things which we cannot produce in Uganda?
Gentlemen and lady, many thanks for honoring our invitation to appear here on The Big Talk. I think it's been a very insightful conversation, and I hope that in one way or another it will be impactful to the people out there. My name is Canary Mugume. This has been The Big Talk. We catch up on Monday, 7 to 8 p.m. Good morning.
106.1 Next Radio.